And as we go on, you'll see that that is really the truth in orthodontics. When you consider that we were splitting palates in 1860 and then completely forgot about it at the time of the First World War, and it wasn't until the 1960s until it was remembered again. Also, you sort of have to quote Engel. I think it was 1908, something like that. He said, "No one can know much of a science unless he knows its history." So, I'm going to give you a little bit about the history. And what I'm going to do here is, actually, maybe I made a mistake in getting this so far over, because at the start, essentially, there weren't journals, there weren't societies, there weren't schools, and so, yeah, just a little back, yeah, there. So just about there, so I can get my notes there. Essentially, the big advance was books. When people started to write books about dentistry, of which regulating malocclusion, that's the term. You know, we talk about we're going to straighten your teeth, we're going to put on braces. They had a better term back then, irregulating a malocclusion. So essentially, and I'll put the dates over here. That is sort of the start of dentistry as a learned calling, because we had Pierre Fouchard, and his book was I can't remember if there's an E on the end. Yes, there is an E. Anybody here speak French? German? Good. Then I can pronounce things, and you won't know that it's bad. Fouchard had his book was in 2 volumes, and there were several chapters that dealt with, just as an ordinary part of dentistry, that dealt with the regulation of malocclusion. And his appliance was the bandolette. And there are 2 versions of it. And that was made of silver, and the teeth would be tied to that with raw waxed silk. Now the deal is, you have to realize that in activating these gizmos, what would be done is this would be pushed in. It would be tied and then let go, and so that would account for the expansion. The other version of the bandolette looked like this. It was made of silver. It was hollowed on under there, and it would be put on the teeth, and it also had holes where the teeth could be ligated to it. One of the things also, and you have to remember that you couldn't go down to Ransom and Randolph and buy stuff. Everything had to be made by the dentist who wanted to regulate teeth. So, for example, if he would use just you could probably view it as sort of like a part of a shim stock. And the way they had to make that, they had to use a rolling mill to make it thinner. And in this case, if he had teeth that needed to be straightened, what he would do is nowadays we'd say he would slenderize them, but he would do that, and then this piece of gold or silver, he would put it on like that, and it would be through these holes. It'd be tied in place, and it was rather clever when you start to think that it would push the teeth apart and at the same time bring the crooked tooth into alignment. I'm going to draw you, however, what was the most common orthodontic appliance of the time. We'll see if you can tell me what it is. Well, that tells me one thing not to use. What would you guess that is? It was called a pelican. And it was, in fact, extraction forceps, and the most common way of doing things. Bad alignment, you just grab a hold of it and move it to place immediately, and then wire it in place. And in fact, you think that's horrible, but there was a time when, let's see if I can, you have a thing like that that would be used to separate the teeth, so you could do a gold foil, and you could separate the teeth by a couple millimeters. But this was more than a couple millimeters. He would just move the teeth to where he wanted, and he would then ligate them in place. So essentially what this part is, it's the story of how to get rid of that red stuff there. No, the story of the books. And one of the things you'll notice, and I suppose I should put here, Fouchard was French. And then we go to, and I've got these sort of in order. Philip Pfaff, who was, the deal is, you had to be fairly wealthy to have your teeth, quote, straightened. And so Philip Pfaff was the dentist to the King of Prussia, Frederick de Grosse, the King of Prussia, who, by the way, interestingly, he was Hitler's hero, by the way. And Friedrich de Grosse was very afraid of water. And so every year his attendants, once a year, would take him, tear off his clothes, and force him to take a bath. This was, well, I'll pretend to be sophisticated. His book was Abhandlung von der Zähnen, a study of the teeth, and it was 1756. It was the first, this was the first French text, first text period. This was, Philip Pfaff was the first German text, And essentially the thing that he started to popularize, and I'll talk more about it later, was the use of plaster of Paris for many, many different things. In fact, he'd take models, he'd take impressions in wax and then pour them up in plaster of Paris. Now we've got Bernard Bourdet, and he was, guess what his country was? Biola. He was French, and he was the dentist to the Queen, dentist to Delabar. He was the dentist to the Queen, and his book was, well, I'll say it in English: Research and Observations on All the Parts of the Art of the Dentist. And he, to show you that our controversies are immortal. First of all, what would you guess was the number one malocclusion that people would want to have fixed back then? What?
That's 3.
Yes, because anything else. I remember when I was a student in Ireland, my banker, he was missing a central incisor. No problem. They didn't consider that particularly bad. But class 3, you know, the Habsburg jaw, people thought that class 3 was bad. So his approach was in the lower arch, I'm sorry, in the maxilla. And I suppose, no, I can't do anything in gold because I don't have that color. So this is going to have to be brown gold. He would put a bar like that to which he would tie the teeth to expand things like that. And then, surprise, surprise, in the lower arch, the band would be on the lingual. And it's one of, you know, just something like that, bent into a U, and to that, the teeth, I probably was tied this way. And so they could supposedly shrink the lower arch and expand the upper arch. The interesting thing about Bourdet was that he would extract bimaxillary protrusion. He would extract 4 first bicuspids, or what we would call bimaxillary protrusion right now. And the interesting thing was, if a canine was blocked out, you know, you'd say, okay, fine, extract a bicuspid and bring it down. He would extract bicuspids bilaterally so that so the midlines would be on, which is kind of a crafty thing back in 1757. Oh, I forgot to tell you, down here, he would extract 2 bicuspids in the lower arch. The next person, and this guy was really a heavy hitter. He was one of the first real scientists, and that was John Hunter. And his books came out in, 1771 and 78. And the interesting thing is, if you go to London now, there's the Hunterian Museum, where you can see all of John Hunter's stuff except the stuff that was destroyed in the Second World War. John Hunter, his book, and I'll write this out. Teeth or dentition? Oh, yeah. And I wrote that out because you see the term natural history? That was sort of synonymous, that's the term they use for science. And so if you walk down to State Street, you know, the building on your left across from what the hell's the auditorium named? Hill Auditorium. If you look on the top of that, it says natural science. That's 1914. That was the term. Natural science was the term. Natural history, natural science. That was the terminology in use. Now the deal is, John Hunter. He had 3 chapters on the irregularity of the teeth. And he's the first person to discuss what an ideal occlusion was. He described malocclusion, and the interesting thing was he said that malocclusion was dental irregularity, arch size discrepancy, and skeletal deformity. And of course, skeletal deformity was class 3. You know, you can probably say, well, he was a point-headed intellectual, but he had in his book methods of correction. And of course, if class 3 was the big deal, his method of correction, let me see here if I can do this. I've done better, but also I've done worse. This was silver. It was dropped down on the lower dentition, and of course, the purpose was to kick teeth out of crossbite. He also investigated. He investigated transplantation, and you pretend that this is a chicken with the wattle hanging down, and what he would do is he would transplant teeth. He knew that the comb of a chicken had lots of blood, so he transplanted teeth. And in fact, in the Hunterian Museum, you can see some of these chicken heads preserved, and you can see the outline of the tooth where he had implanted it. He also thought that if there was caries, he would extract the teeth, boil them, and reimplant them. He tried to argue that it was one thing to just sort of make claims and everything like that, but but you had to come up with data. And he said, if I can remember, he said, don't think, try. He was in favor of actual experimentation. I think that's good enough. He was a heavy hitter, and it's really good to see the Hunterian Museum in London. Well, I think I have room for one more. I need a person along the side there to put the caps on these things. Anyway, this is Joseph Fox. And he of course was English. Joseph Fox was English, and his book came out in 1799. Joseph Fox was a dental surgeon at Guy's Hospital. He was the first dentist to give lectures at Guy's Hospital, and his book was The Natural History and Diseases of the Human Teeth. Again, natural history being the science. The thing about him, he was English. You notice there, you see the United States up there any place? Not at all, not at all. His deal was that the other books were sort of like an advertisement on television, or for that matter, an advertisement in orthodontics today, where they would show the wonderful things, but the book wouldn't necessarily tell how he did it, how the people did it. Come to me and these wonderful things can accrue to you. He was the first one to actually give instructions on how to do what he wanted to do. And this, of course, was the first British dental text. But he was famous for, and let's see if I can do this properly. And that was gold. And then there was ivory bite blocks, which were held in place. I think it was with gold, and this, of course, was perforated like that. And the deal was, they realized that if they had to jump the bite, if they had to correct a class 3, what we call a class 3 or a class 2, the occlusion was a problem. So his eye, just a second. It's early, I can still bend over. Yeah, that would be better. Like that. He realized that he had to open up the bite so the occlusion wouldn't do anything. So the teeth would be hooked to that with wax silk. And then he had another thing. When you were a kid and read comics, how did the comic book show that a little kid had a headache? Yes, that's a fox bandage. The fox bandage wrapped around to hold the mandible in position, tied at top, and so that goes back to 1799. Let me see here. But the fox bite plane was used for a very long time. I believe even Angle used it occasionally. But now we come to Christopher Francois Delabar. Actually, hyphen. And he, of course, was French, and this is 1819. French. And his book, oh, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, he had his first. Oh yeah, this was a 9 right there. His first book was called Seconde Dentition, and the second one, Observations sur les dents humaines. He was French, and for example, if he wanted to rotate, say, and that's terrible. No wonder I did poorly in dental anatomy. He would make essentially a crown of gold that would fit on there, and then out of this he would have a wire, and he would use that for rotating the teeth. Where do you get the wire? You had to draw it through a die. So this would be gold. But the big thing, his big invention. And if we draw, let me see if I can never remember how to do this. His method of opening the bite was what has come to be called a crib. It was a wired device like that. I don't have it quite big enough, but it would snap over the teeth. This was a crib. It would snap over the teeth, and that would disrupt the bite. Interestingly enough, in almost all countries except the United States, any kind of wire clasp or anything that touches the teeth is a crib. You folks know about Adam's clasps, right? Well, my last time at the Royal Victoria Hospital with a discussion with the great man, C. Philip Adams, passed the thing around, and one of the residents said, I'd put on an Adams crib. Now, I'd worked as a technician going through dental school, so I know it had been Adams class, but I made the mistake of saying, what's an Adams crib? That was my last time at the Royal Victoria Hospital. So this was, this was used for many, many years. And in fact, the terminology is still in use. Let's see. Okay. Now, Joseph Zigmund. This would be, I don't remember, I didn't put down the year here. I think it was about 1826. And he was English, and this was essentially, it was the first orthodontic text. And it was called, I guess the only thing I put this down is because it was the first orthodontic text. There was nothing in it that I thought was interesting. Practical and domestic treatise on the diseases and irregularity of the teeth and gums with the methods of treatment. Now, actually, I should tell you, this whole soiree here is going to go up to about 1839 because something important in dentistry happened in 1839. I'll get rid of some of this and chug on. See, no journals, just books. And I suppose this is not, like Paul Revere was supposedly a dentist. But when, what did he make George Washington's teeth? Well, that didn't lead anybody. Although, interesting enough, in case I forget it, George Washington's teeth were lost, and George Northcroft, who was the founder of the British Society for the Study of Orthodontia, or Orthodontics, somehow he'd gotten a hold of George Washington's teeth, and he sent them back to the United States. Now, the interesting, George Northcroft, the founder of the British Society for the Study of Orthodontics, I think it was an 1892 graduate of the University of Michigan. And we're going to get to a point in the next lecture where everybody, all the dentists in the world wanted, or the ones who wanted to become something, would want to get their BTA degree. You know what a BTA degree was? Been to America. Okay. In fact, four of the 10 founders of the European Society were Michigan graduates. Anyway, I say that just because I'll probably forget about it later when it's appropriate to talk about that. Oops, that's no good. Change out of this before my wife sees me. And this is 1828 JCF. And he, of course, was French. And his book was the complete treatise on the art of the dentist after the estate of actual results. He supposedly was showing actual results. And one of his claims to fame was he invented the dental spittoon, which is actually sort of pretty good. But the deal was, we don't have brackets yet, but the deal was he was concerned when he ligated teeth together or ligated teeth to an arch bar, he was concerned that he wanted to control the height of the ligatures. So some of you will remember, just a second, probably when some of you were little girls, you remember that, where you cut them out and paste them on and change the clothes and everything like that? Okay. Yeah, a microaggression there. But what he did was he rolled things out. Let's see. Wait a minute, got that wrong here. I never can do this properly. But anyway, he put a thing like that on the teeth, bend the tabs back, and then he could use this to control the ligature. And also, he popularized gingival incisions to speed the eruption of the teeth. Okay, Thomas Bell, on his 1829. And by the way, he's not the one who discovered Bell's palsy. That was Sir Charles Bell from Scotland. But Thomas Bell was a dentist, and he became professor of zoology at the King's College. And the deal is, he practiced dentistry to get enough money to write the definitive monograph on turtles. And it's still the definitive monograph on turtles, and that's what he used his pound, shilling, and pence for. So he was a smart guy. And he was English. What he did, everybody's got to have a way of opening the bite. And so his method of opening the bite was to put crowns on the molars. And Botticelli had the lost wax technique, but Taggart hadn't brought it to dentistry yet. And so essentially what they do to make a crown like that, they would take a piece of gold like that, and they'd put it together and that would be the crown. In fact, when I was here, when I was a clinical instructor here, I used to have to take the undergraduate students and show them how to I think that was bad, to make a band, a lap band out of gold, which was, you know, you'd bevel it like that, put them together, solder it, etc. But then when he had that, then he would have a thing like that, and that would open the bite, and this was that was a bar like that to which the teeth could be ligated. And remember, if you ever have to tie in stuff with metal, remember, the ties don't pull. The ties merely hold. So he'd push this against and then tie it. And for example, when you're using 010 to tie the teeth, it's the first turn that's important. You can't stand back with Matthew needle holders and expect this is going to work. You hold it, first turn, and then the needle holders hold that first turn. Anyway, he was 1829. The Anatomy, Physiology, and Diseases of the Teeth. How often would you, I forgot to tell you this, I'll tell you, how often do you think he would bring the patient in to tighten the ligatures? What?
Once a month.
Ooh! Every day. Now remember, that's the one thing that's, nothing funnier than watching an old guy fall and break a hip. The deal is, what you folks have is you have materials with much, much greater working range. Much greater working range. That's the big thing. These had essentially no working range, and so they had to bring them in every day to adjust it. Friedrich Kniesel, 1836. Friedrich Kniesel, Der Schiefstand der Zähne. I don't know, study of the teeth, something like that. And this was German, and it was the first German orthodontic text, and also it was published in France, and it was also then became the first French orthodontic text. But the interesting thing is, he sort of perfected the use of plaster, and so does that look like anything you've seen? That was his tray. Actually, I probably should move this over here a little bit. Surprisingly difficult to draw that. He would take a plaster impressions, and it's interesting. You think, oh my God, how could it be a plaster impression? I've seen the lab upstairs. I've seen the swamp. In any event, when I was in school and when it looked like that, we were threatened with having to take our impressions in plaster and trim them by hand. And the interesting thing is the way it was, if this is the upper arch, what you would do is, hey, the only thing is this didn't have a rim on it. It didn't have a rim on it. So this was, you'd come in the upper arch and you'd have a glob of plaster like that with the teeth under there. And what you'd do is you would score the surface like that. You'd score there, And with luck, that would come out in 3 pieces. And then if this is the tray, you could put the pieces back in the tray, and then you could use shellac or soot or something like that as a separating medium, and you could pour them up. His approach, for example, I'll read you this. Wax impressions to yield a sulfur model from which a plaster impression was made, from which a metal die and counter die were made, and then they were swedged. And you probably don't know about swedging, and I'll tell you right now, because I probably wouldn't have graduated from dental school if it weren't for swedging. But anyway, I'll show you. Say you've got, say you've got things that work. Say you've got a model. I'll do this. Onto which you've made an MOD, which, of course, in my hands, was all splayed out like that. So what you do, you had, I'll draw, this is what I'm drawing here. You'd have a cylinder like that, which would be filled with clay. And this thing would be put in there like that, and then it would be capped like that. There would be a cap that went on it, and it also would be filled with clay. And what you would do is you, as the British would say, you'd take a bloody great hammer and hit that, and it would just squash everything down. So a die and a counter die like that, and if you put gold in between, if say that was a crown form or something like that, you put it in a swedger and hit it, and you could make crowns and everything like that. So when he said he would get a metal die and a counter die and swedge them, that's what he was talking about there. That was great fun, by the way. Let me, as an aside, just, yeah, okay. You should know, I know our residents are little boy and girl wonders. You all did really well in dental school, but your background is very, very different from that of your attendings. Even me, when growing up at East Jordan, I whittled and I took shop and I made things and I soldered. I know I went through dental school. I worked as a lab tech, and we had to make our own. We had to set up our dentures. We had to flask them. We had to do foils. We had to make direct wax patterns and cast them up. We had to do all that stuff. Well, here now they've taken out the casting pits. So the deal is, and now they're the smartphones. And so your technical experience is much, 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 much less than that of your attendings. And so the deal is, when they tell you they'd like you to do something, don't go over in the corner and pretend and say, well, nobody will notice. Say to your attending, show me how to do it. Show me how to do it. Because the deal is, they don't know that you've spent your entire life on a smartphone, that you've never whittled anything, stuff like that. Say, show me. Anyway, That's an aside. I hope they can get rid of that on there, because that's a macroaggression, actually. So if we look at sort of an intellectual summary of this area, in terms of maxillomandibular relations, the classification was very fragmentary. In Hunter's book, you know, the malocclusion would be described almost tooth by tooth. Although, interestingly enough, in 1842, Carabelli had a classification system that was almost identical to that of Angle. I don't know, I think he may have published in Latin, I don't know. But in any event, people didn't read much. 1842, it was almost identical. They knew that it was, they knew that there might be a problem in the relationship of one jaw to another. They talked about irregularity of teeth within a given arch. They talking about etiology. They thought that class 2, what we would call class 2 now, was a result of finger sucking, what they called fruitless sucking. Alexander Naismith's epithelial membrane, who, by the way, was the dentist to Victoria and Albert in England, he said 3 memoirs on the development and structure of the teeth and epithelium. And this, well, 1839, this is the last one, and he's the one who came up with the idea of fruitless sucking. So, yeah, there's something else hidden under here. And they knew about tooth size, jaw size discrepancies. They thought that a lot of malocclusions were due to problems with eruption. Either the teeth were erupting too early or too late. And if they were erupting too late, there were gingival incisions to take care of that. In terms of treatment, immediate luxation, which is pretty rapid tooth movement with expanders, extraction. With gum, some people would extract in the deciduous dentition, others would extract in the permanent dentition. But the deal was that it was controversial at that time. One person said, to extract is not to cure, but to destroy. Well, this was up 1839. That's a magic year. And I think, with luck, there can be a few scant seconds for you to have a luncheon. So let's take a look at this section here. This was sort of dentistry when curing irregularities was just sort of a minor part of each book. And so this, all these are dried up now. I have to use a lead pencil on there. This section here is okay, young doctors, when was the American Civil War? No, gee, that was even before the Mexican War. When was the American Civil War? And it's on right now. But then again, I won't talk about politics. Instead, I'll decide whether my invisible man's better than yours. But anyway, when was the American Civil War?
60s.
Two. Take me now, God. Take me now. But 61 to 65. So essentially what we're talking about here is orthodontics at the dawn of modern dentistry. And the deal is, the tripod of a learned calling is a school, a society, and a journal. Once your calling has those three things, or once whatever you do has those three things, it's a learned calling, and we have anybody here go to Tufts? No, not Tufts, Temple? Okay, good. No, I don't mean that quite the way it sounds, although maybe a little bit. The Baltimore College of Dental Surgery. That was the world's first dental school. Now, the fact that later on it was taken over by the University of Maryland, I asked if anybody was here from Temple, because Temple say that they're the oldest continuous dental school because Baltimore College was taken over. But anyway, so you got the Baltimore College, and this is 1839, and you have the American Journal of Dental Science, and then lastly, the American, and this is all 1839. I may be cheating a little bit here. I talked to the guy who was the dean at Baltimore, and he tried to tell me that it was 1840, but what the hell do deans know? And then there's the American and that lasted for 16 years, 39 and 16, what is it, 55? Why would you, just for fun, why would you guess the American Society of Dental Surgeons ceased to exist around 1855 or 60?
Got drafted?
No. The Civil War. It divided the country. And so, for example, it was a long time, it was into the 20th century before the ADA would allow dentists from the South to be members of the American Dental Association. And so the Southern dentists, they were the National Dental Association, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the Society of Dental Surgeons, it couldn't be something called the American Society could not survive the Civil War. And it was quite a long time before they came together. Okay. This, by the way, and I should give this a name. That's the Tripod of Dentistry. Interesting enough, later on we'll talk about the Tripod of Orthodontics, because for Orthodontics, those three things came about essentially the same year. But now it's 1839 to the Civil War. We have dentists who, fill teeth and make dentures, but they're kind of interested in treating irregularity, and they become sort of famous for treating irregularity of the malocclusion, of the occlusion. So let's take a look. Now you'll notice suddenly all the fame, rather than being in Europe, comes over the United States. In fact, if you go to Paris in 1890, to show you, in 1895, the American Dental Society of Paris was formed. That was for people who had their BTA degree in the United States. And the interesting thing about that was, and it's still, I spoke there one time, the deal is all their proceedings had to be in English. Even though, you know, the French were getting rid, they didn't like franglais and everything like that, they were getting rid of, but in the American Dental Society of Paris, all the meetings are in English. Okay, let's take a look at some of the ideas. First of all, etiology. And this was, it's not important. Charles Delude. But it's interesting in that, and this is 1840, irregularity is due to the supernumerary teeth, to second teeth being too large and the maxillary arch too narrow, to too early extraction and too long persistence of temporary teeth, to the shape of the maxillary arch. And here it is, if I had a nickel for every time you're going to use the following sentence, I could have retired long ago. And to heredity, where the child inherits the jaw of one parent and the teeth of the other. And that's where you say, oh, Mrs. Jones, of course, what can I tell you? Look at your husband. Look at your husband. But the interesting thing is, the size of teeth, size of the face, it's polygenically inherited. Like, for example, on ads in which there are black families in the ads, color is inherited polygenically, so their kids can't be darker than the darker parent, and they can't be lighter than the lighter parent, because essentially each kid is reaching into a pail full of genes. Some of them white, some of them black, and they come out with a mixture. So you really can't inherit the jaw of one parent and the teeth of another. Okay, let's take a look at terminology. Pierre Joachim, God, my reading is getting worse and worse and worse, just like, because my pens are drying up. Lysle in, I think it was 1841. He was trying to decide what you should call the correction, the treatment of irregularity. And he was torn between, in French, dental orthopedics or orthodonticy in French. And so we decided on orthodontics, or orthodontia as the name, until we started to get scared about pediatric dentists doing orthodontics. And so in the 1980s, Toro Mordecai Graber, the editor of the AJO, decided that they would fight the pedodontists by changing the name from the American Journal of Orthodontics to the American Journal of Orthodontics and Dentofacial Orthopedics. So we were returning to 1841. He's the one who said to extract is not to cure, but to destroy. Okay, let's take a look at retention. And retention is interesting because our theories of retention, well, of course, nobody pays attention to retention anymore. As long as you can put on a 3 to 3 or a 5 to 5, you're in good shape. But I'll just tell you about that. When you retire 40 years from now, you will have thousands of patients floating around with your appliance in their mouth. And I know you give them a prophy, everything's perfect, put it on, now it's up to you. Well, when you go to a car park and they give you a ticket, and the ticket says not responsible for the car and lost up, but when you go to court, they are responsible. And if it goes to court, you are responsible for these people. So that's a little something to think about, because somebody, I think, inhaled a 3-3 in England a few months ago. And, well, there's lots of problems about that. Retention, I like this guy. J. Malagou Alexis Changé, and he is the one who's got us 1841 got us start to thinking about retention. And the interesting thing is, we really haven't progressed much, because the idea is like we're carpenters. You know, you put the parts together, you put the glue, you put a clamp, and you put the clamp on until the glue dries. And so now, you know, for those who are trying for stability, you wear a holly or something like that until the glue dries. Dry all the time, and then just at nights, and then any other night, and you assume that in a couple of years the glue has dried. That's about all we know about retention. I'll talk about him a little bit later. And then we have the equilibrium theory. The equilibrium theory, and this is by Delabar and Bridgman. But Delabar and Bridgman, and I think, no, 1850. They're different dates. But this is something you should think about. Why are teeth where they are? Why are teeth where they are?
It's most stable there.
Okay, what makes the teeth where they are? What makes it stable?
Soft tissue pressures.
Okay.
Fibers.
Well, the fibers do what the soft tissue says to do. Their idea was that they had this is force, and the deal is teeth are where they are, and alveolar bone are where they are because of pressure from the cheek, pressure from the tongue, and pressure of occlusion. So, for example, if you were to take my eraser away from me, if you were to take there we go. If you were to take a freestanding, oh God, this is terrible. No wonder I was a bad dentist. If you're taking a freestanding bicuspid and you were to put a gold onlay right there, and if that were 2 millimeters thick, what would happen to that tooth long term? How much?
1 millimeter.
Yes, people use to say 2 millimeters. Okay, it goes 2 millimeters, now it's too much there, and it goes back. But the fact is, this experiment's been done over and over again. The deal is, because it's in balance between the cheeks, lips, tongue, everything like that, that's the thing that determines the position of a tooth. So the deal is, that's something that you might kind of keep in the back of your head when you start to blow stuff out. And the question is, how do you expect that to be stable? And the question is, well, I don't expect it to be stable. I expect to retain it forever. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. But the equilibrium theory, the teeth are where they are because they're in balance. And when you blow them out, they're no longer in balance. And who knows what happens, okay? Limitations. Limitations of orthodontics. And this is Simon P. Houlihan. What his idea was, you do surgery. You'd cut the condyles, move the jaw back, wire it in place. Now the question is, how in 1841 would you do a bilateral condylotomy? And I know you're going to say quickly or when the patient's drunk, but how do you think he would do it? Well, yeah, just walk over to that banana peel. Well, there's a thing called a giggly saw. Have you ever heard of a giggly saw? A giggly saw is essentially just a piece of wire that's been, its surface has been cut like that. And during the war, a giggly saw was used for rapid amputations. They would take a big blade, they cut down through the bone, and then zip, 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 zip. So in this case, Houlihan, if this is the condyle, what he would do is he would take a curved blade like that, into which was a giggly saw. And what he would do is he would quickly pass it behind the condyle, pull it out, take the giggly saw, and cut the condyle. And the deal is that he'd move the jaw back and wire it in place. And when you're in practice, you're going to have people come in with a scar under their chin, and you're going to look at the x-ray, and you're going to find that they had a bilateral condylar fracture, and that it's sort of remodeled, and pretty much everything's sort of okay. And so that's the first use of surgery. Now, there's also a big argument. What is the relationship between malocclusion and caries? What's the relationship?
No relationship.
No relationship. Absolutely. What's the relationship between malocclusion and periodontal disease? Now, you can figure that out for yourself. When you did a surgery rotation before a denture, what were the last teeth you took out? The last teeth would probably be in the patient's. Yeah. What are the teeth that most likely to be crowded? Lower incisors. In fact, at one time I was going to for charity, going to let somebody extract one of my lower incisors just for charity. In fact, I got a minute here. There's a wonderful thing on YouTube. It's from Britain, and a guy is calling his dentist, and he said, "How much would you charge to extract a bicuspid?" And the dentist said, 50 pounds. And the guy said, "Well, that's pretty expensive. What if you didn't use any anesthetic?" And the dentist said, "Well, maybe 40 pounds, but that would be excruciatingly painful." And the guy says, and what would happen if you didn't clean your instruments, everything like that? You wouldn't have to go through that. And the guy said, well, I could probably do it for 35 pounds, but he said, it would be excruciatingly painful and it would be dangerous. The guy says, that's okay. I'll call for an appointment for my wife next week. Anyway. So for a long time, in fact, in the old days when I was at St. Louis, when I used to think the young doctors were getting a little uppity, I would assign a one-page paper on the role of orthodontics and malocclusion in periodontal disease. And so they would have to go and say, well, come to think of it, we're not preventing periodontal disease and everything like that. But anyway, people were talking at that time about habits. I told you fruitless sucking. The idea is the classification of occlusion, other than Carabelli, which people hadn't read, was still fragmentary. Everything was described sort of tooth by tooth. Aesthetics. And Cornelius Marvin. And the reason I tell you about this, to show you how ideas have changed. When I was a senior, the last lecture, and by the way, the last lecture was by a guy that later on came to Case Western Reserve and used to teach for me once a month. But he came in and he was giving the reasons that you should refer to an orthodontist, maybe me. And he had all this list of things. And number 10 on his list was aesthetics. And somebody in the class, maybe your humble servant, observed that maybe aesthetics should be a little higher on the list, like number 1. He got angry, went to the chair, said the class of 61 is awful. All they care about is money. Moyers gave a final exam, which was unheard of in seniors, and your humble servant found himself really, really lucky to get a C, because we've spent all this time saying that we are attempts to medicalize orthodontics. Attempts, and the idea, for example, even the AJO, you go to their website, orthodontics is more than a pretty smile. You know, we're always worried about being called cosmetologists, even though the trend in orthodontics today is in fact toward absolute cosmetology with no science. Well, here's what Marvin said. The objects of treatment: the presentation of correct facial expression, the restoration of such expression if through the irregularity of the teeth it has been lost, the proper articulation of teeth for better mastication, their orderly arrangement with a view to the prevention of decay, the preservation of facial expression. That was absolutely amazing. The last complete denture class we had, and it was in the old building. It was like in a Hammer horror movie. We had this stacks of chairs, and each seat had a number, so that if the guy giving the class could see a number, mine was 9, they could tell you weren't there, so they could take. Anyway, now I've forgotten what I wanted to say about that. Oh, I know. The last one, there was a dental chair down there, and the pros guy brought in a woman. She sat down. He gave her an apple, and he said, "Would you eat this apple for these young folks?" And the woman ate the apple, and everything was okay. He said, "Now, would you open your mouth and show them your teeth?" And she opened her mouth. She had no teeth. So the idea that it's for for proper mastication, for proper nutrition, to prevent decay, to preserve against periodontal disease. It's none of those. None of those. Nobody ever starved from a malocclusion. This woman didn't starve. Anyway, so now let's get into some interesting stuff. These are ideas. Let's talk about bits and pieces of the techniques that were employed. Oh, I thought that was something I should erase, but I guess I have to keep that. Okay, bands. So important that I print it carefully. The first bands, the so-called plain bands, bands, you know, where they're soldered there. That's a plain band. And those were developed at Baltimore College of Dental Surgery by the Dean Chapin Harris. It was probably an amalgam matrix band, probably. But the real popular band, well, we'll put that aside. There was a plain band. And now, against that, was the clamp band. And that was developed by J. Malagou Alexis Changé. And it was in 1847. And I'll do this quickly. That was the clamp band. Just put it around the teeth and tightened it up. Which of these, do you guess, became more popular? The plain band or the clamp band? Quicker, easier, cheaper. Any two will do. This was by far the most popular band, and it was the most popular band for a very, very long time. And it wasn't until 1870s that they started to use zinc phosphate with the plain band. And the interesting thing is, you say, whoa, geez, wasn't there a lot of decay and everything? Absolutely. And that's why, if you look at the old literature, they were always experimenting with a different kind of material. Maybe platinum, maybe iridio-platinum, maybe German, maybe nickel silver. They were always looking for, because they really didn't know what caused decay. Willoughby Dayton Miller, it's up there. It wasn't until about 1900 that he said that maybe it was due to bacterial decay was due to bacteria, and even when I was in school, they didn't believe that. They did not believe that. But the interesting thing about Willoughby D. Miller, he spent time in Koch's lab in Berlin. He was a great guy. He was a graduate of Ohio State, and he was coming to Michigan to be dean, and on the way to Michigan, he died of a ruptured appendix. And a lot of folks from Ohio coming to Michigan, that's happened to them. But anyway, so what?
So I was one of the lucky ones.
What?
I did dental school at Ohio State.
Okay. You've seen Script Ohio, right? Okay. Script Ohio was invented by the University of Michigan Marching Band in 1934.
Really?
Yes, really. Would I lie? Jesus. I can remember one time I had a bet with a guy when I was teaching at Western Reserve, and we bet, I think it was a case of beer on the outcome, and Michigan won. And so he gave me my case of beer, and I opened one, and it was just water. And the next day I said there must have been something wrong with the manufacturing, because all my beers are just water. And he laughed at me. He had taken every beer can, he had turned it upside down, drilled a hole, poured out the beer, put in water, and then soldered it over. Okay. We don't have arch wires yet. Put in, be a little more careful. With this. But what we did have, some people would use gizmos like that, sometimes with maybe elastics over the front to move teeth. And in fact, if we look at this, see here. People were splitting the palate back then. I don't know how successfully, but we don't quite have arch wires yet. But as I said before, sometimes they put elastic over the front, and that was sometimes used for retention. And J. Malagou Alexis Changer said, "It would be wrong to think that once the teeth are brought back to normal position, the whole treatment is completed. They must be kept in place, assigned to them, for a long time after treatment in order that they may attain the proper firmness, especially if treatment has progressed for a considerable length of time." Again, gotta wait till the glue dries. If we look at Evans, Evans was the one who thought that malocclusion was bad for your health and bad for the dentition. Evans, and his approach was that he would see if I can do this properly. Here's what I want. I knew that. There. He would have a thing like this made of swedged gold, and then on the back here, and these are supposed to be pointing out at you. There'd be two things like that through which he would put a wire. And, for example, you could have springs, etc. These weren't quite buccal tubes yet, but pretty soon they switched over to buccal tubes like so, into which went a threaded arch wire like that. And the idea was that you'd put that in there, and to advance the arch wire to which the teeth were attached, you just turn the screw like that. In fact, interesting enough, what they would, sometimes they would use what's called grass line. Grass line ligature, which was made of linen. And the deal was, you know, I said, it's the first turn that holds everything, and the subsequent turns hold it. Well, grass line, linen, it would shrink when it got wet. So you could tie the teeth to the arch wire there with grass line, and when you could then advance, you could turn the screw, which, and they had a counter-beveled device that they turned the screw with, and I never could draw the counter-bevel right, to advance the arch wire and also use grass line to grab a hold of the teeth. Okay, how about the forces? No, forces, F-O-R-C-E-S. I'm talking about reality here, but anyway. Okay. Well, once again, I say you couldn't go down to Ransom and Randolph and say, give me some alligator elastics or whatever. What they would do is they'd buy a tube, an India rubber tube, and then if they wanted, they could cut it this way to have long, light forces, or they'd cut it this way or this way. And as I said, when I went through dental school, I worked as a lab tech, and the orthodontist I worked for, in his trash drawer, you're looking back at his life in the trash drawer, was elastics that he had cut out of India rubber tubing. And of course, what you ended up with was an elastic that was sort of all screwed up like that. But apparently it worked. The big thing was the jack screw. And this was about 1840. Dwinell and Gain. And they were British. And I'll actually take a little bit of time. Okay. In drawing this, what a jack screw looked like. And these, by the way, this was a thing that you didn't have to make yourself. And so this, we'll see later, one guy told that this was the start of scientific orthodontics, where you didn't have to make everything, you could go buy it. And now, the deal was, and I'll just quickly show you, you may not have any idea what that does. they might put on a clamp band like that, and then have a thing like that to which these things would be attached. In fact, Angle called this a mechanical curiosity. But the deal was, this would turn, and this was free to turn. This was not, yeah, I don't have it quite right. You could go in with a right angled thing like this, and you could turn the screw, and then this was what you would attach to the teeth. And in fact, I think some of them had it so that this was attached to that, and then there was another thing up there that was free to turn. But anyway, this was, the jack screw was a really important thing for a very, very long period of time. And in fact, I'll show you here. See, as we get along, I get a little more careful. They would use a screw like that to split the palate, and what you'd give the patient to turn it, you'd take a dime and cut a little slot in it. And that's what they would use to turn that to split the palate. Let me see here. Extraoral traction, just a little bit more here. They developed the chin cup, and Gunnell said, and what it was he would, see if I can do this for you. Oh, wait a minute, we wouldn't use a chin cup on that guy. It'd be like this, and then there would be a head cap, a knitted head cap like so, and there would be a heavy elastic there. And they would also use a tongue depressor, and they'd put in Fox bite blocks. They'd use a tongue depressor. They'd use a chin cup. And Gunnell said, in this way, I have restored the face's jaws to their proper symmetry in 1 week, though occasionally it will take from 3 to 6 weeks or even longer. Now, before you say, oh, they got to be crazy, what kind of class 3 could you, in fact, with a chin cup, a tongue depressor, and actually, he also used a Fox bandage to keep the mandible back so they couldn't escape from the thing. What kind of class 3 could you, in fact, correct in a week or two with that? A functional class 3. One where you've got interferences, and the jaw is forward, and you open up with bite blocks, and it goes a little bit with the tongue depressor, everything. So they weren't, I'm saying that only so that you don't think that these people were crazy, that they're not really smart like we are today when we grow mandibles. I mean, really, come on, those folks were crazy, but we know what to do. Okay. The last one, anchorage. And for that, we need to talk about Charles Goodyear. What did Charles Goodyear invent in 1853? What? Oh, no, actually, tires, I think, pneumatic tires were invented by Dunlop in Northern Ireland, and you know, the Michelin Man, like that. Do you know what the Michelin Man's official name is? Bib. Because supposedly the early advertisements, they were invented in France. It was something else invented in Northern Ireland. The early advertisements for Michelin tires showed Bib, the tire man, with a glass filled with nails and glass. And bibendum means I drink. And Bib drank up the nails and the glass and everything like that. And in fact, their headquarters in London, I think, is called Bibendum. No, what did Charles Goodyear invent?
Vulcanized rubber.
Yes. What, number 606? Supposedly he was trying, see, the deal with rubber was that in the summertime, it was gooey and sticky. In the wintertime, it was firm and it would crack and everything like that. So he was trying to think of a way of stabilizing rubber. And supposedly he was one time accidentally spilled some sulfur into his mixture, and then it spilled onto the stove, and the stove cooked it. And so we got vulcanite. And why do you think they call it vulcanite? Who was the god of fire? Vulcan. So it was vulcanite. And so now we've got arch wires, we've got a lot of things, and now we have something that you can, that they, after 1853, they could do anything that we can do now with plastic, with acrylic, everything like that. So I think it's a good time to pack it in. Next time, it's, what was it? Oh, there's a joke that I probably can't tell, not because it's bad, because I can't remember the setup line. But I'll see you in a month. I think they're planning to do these two at a time. When we get to angle, I'll use a PowerPoint presentation, which I will leave here. And so when they get me out like this in front, maybe 20, 30, 40 years from now, they can still play the PowerPoint. So you've got 19 minutes for a nice lunch. Thanks a lot, gang.